welcome to podcast 45 from Tyre and Rubber Recycling. Today, instead of being questioned by Richard, I'm being questioned by a new face for Tyre and Rubber Recycling, Maria Tarataga, who has joined us and will be asking what we're doing today.
Hello, Ewan. So who are we interviewing today and what is the subject of today's podcast?
Today we are interviewing Martin von Wolfersdorff, who is one of the leading consultants on pyrolysis and polymer technologies. Martin was the first person we interviewed in this series of podcasts for Tyre and Rubber Recycling. And in the 2 years since that first podcast, the market has changed dynamically. And we're going to talk to Martin and get his thoughts on the current state of the market. Good morning, Martin. You were the first person we did a podcast with, I think about 2 years ago, and we talked about recovered carbon black and pyrolysis at the time. So 2 years down the line, I think some water's flown under the bridge and things have changed a bit. Can you give us an overview of how you see the changes in the market?
Yes, thank you, Ewan. It's great being in your podcast again. I think the biggest change, really, apart from the scale up and the industrial volumes, the biggest is really a paradigm change, where the industry moves from being a recycling industry, from recycling tires into an industry with a new paradigm, a product-driven industry, a sustainable carbon black alternative, recovered carbon black. So, and that product focus, of course, has a lot of requirements, quality control, a selection of the feedstock, and that really is the major enabler for the industry.
Yeah, so we've seen the likes of Enviro. In Europe, we've seen the likes of Enviro, Pyro, Greenval in Spain, and I believe Alpha Carbon in France, doing quite well. And we are aware of companies like Surtec that are scaling up plants to produce high volumes. We've got Boulder coming into Antwerp, again with high volumes, and these guys have all got proven technology. How do you see this change in the market with these larger scale players making inroads? What will happen to the smaller players who haven't yet made any headway? I'm avoiding mentioning names.
Okay. Yes, I see what you want to ask. There's, of course, the high-profile players you mentioned, and all of them go or plan pretty big production volumes, which is what the industry is needed. There's the market pull. So not only the paradigm change has happened on the supply side, but also on the demand side. I did in 21, I did a survey with the global tire industry, and 65% of the global tire industry, 65% of the production volume have recovered carbon black on the radar as instrumental part on their sustainability journey. So there's the market pull. I'm just about to update my market report with Notch Consulting, so we don't have precise new numbers, but I still think the old numbers hold. There will be a big increase ramping up to about 800,000 tons. I think Michelin said 1 million tons by 2030. These are big volumes. And maybe the industry in delivering that supply capacity is a little bit late, maybe 6 months, maybe 12 months due to ship shortage, due to steel shortage, also due to COVID. There's a number of players that are slower running, even with pretty good technology. These are startups, and they have a high number of challenges. Finance is one. If a company isn't fully financed, doesn't have a strong backing investor like BASF, like a tire company, it's very, very difficult to get the daily burn rate and the monthly burn rate of paying the staff of doing R&D. It is very, very difficult. So there's a number of good companies with solid technology that are slow running, that are maybe not part of that major scale up because of some issues. And other challenges, permitting, product registration, end of waste, REACH. Now we got the good news. Now there are two companies that have partnered, Circtec and Alpha Carbon, with a REACH registration for recovered carbon black, which in turn makes end of waste easier because you can only register products. So if you have a product, you don't have a waste, which is good. But these companies need to run through, they need to inquire with ECHA, they need to be mapped to that REACH registration for recovered carbon black. And then they can participate in the REACH registration. I think smaller companies are still viable, as well as, we all know the tires are not all in one place. And that is the difficulty of these major sites that tend to be in Benelux, in the big chemical parks, Antwerp and Rotterdam. That's not where the tires are. So some of these companies have port access, and they intend to take in tires by barges, pretty much like furnace carbon black producers take in heavy fuel oil, carbon black oil feedstocks by barge, thousands of tons in one barge. And that, of course, is a difficult supply chain. Someone needs to collect all those tires, put them in a barge, deliver them to the plant. So that is a challenging supply chain.
Excuse me. Speaking of supply chains, we're currently running some figures on the UK tire export scene, and depending on which set of figures you look at, somewhere between 50 and 75% of the UK's waste tires get exported. So the remainder largely goes to cement kilns, and I'm hearing from people in the crumb rubber sector that they cannot get feedstock. So we then have a couple of proposed large projects in the UK, looking at 50,000 tonnes per year, and they, I believe, are having feedstock issues. We've seen Wastefront have engaged Gateway out in Dubai to acquire tyres for a plant in Sunderland. It is feedstock being challenged across Europe by particularly the Indian recycling sector.
India is importing a lot of end-of-life tires, although they have millions of tons arising every year. I think the figure is 2 million tons, which is just shy of what we have in Europe, 3.5 million tons. But the logistics and the collection is not so good that the tire pyrolysis companies, tire recycling companies, including also reclaim companies, can easily access their own domestic plastic tires. And of course, when you look at sustainability, we need to look at sustainability with a holistic viewpoint. We cannot just have a nice recycling process, but the scope 3 emissions are in the supply chain, upstream, downstream, and then it doesn't make sense to source the end-of-life tires from very far and to sell the product again very far. That is not really sustainable. However, nobody has the proper way of sustainability. The pathway to net zero is not yet defined. So any incremental change is helping. But clearly, long supply chains are not only difficult to manage and to protect from disruption, but they're also not sustainable. But it goes further. It's not only the volume of the tires that is required and that might lack in certain countries like the UK and certain regions, but for the pyrolysis, we also need to control the feedstock. Not speaking about brands, that's a question that often comes up. It's impractical to separate brands. Technically, it would be feasible, but you would need such a large number of tires to separate by brand. I think the tire companies now have realized they cannot ask that, and they need to recycle all brands together. But then the type of tire and the chemical composition going into the pyrolysis plays a huge role to the quality of the end products, notably recovered carbon black. So it's not only the volume that is required, but we also want to have a consistent composition going into the pyrolysis, maybe in order to limit the inorganic or ash content, maybe a consistent mix of truck and passenger car tires. So it's not only the total volume that we need, but also some kind of type of tires and composition of the end-of-life tires we want to control. Then it gets really difficult to do that for a fairly large process, like 200,000 tons capacity, which is the bigger capacity sites in Antwerp.
Yeah. The mix is always an interesting one, and it's. I can remember in the early days, people talking about taking tires for pyrolysis, and they said, "Oh, it doesn't matter what we take. We can pyrolyze it. We can produce recovered carbon black."
Yeah.
But that was in the days when things were a little less specific, shall we say, and the market wasn't really known. It was, people believed that they could sell the product, but when they went to the tire manufacturers, it wasn't quite so clear that they were going to buy. Whereas today, the tire manufacturers have given a specification. They have said, this is what we want. These are the volumes we need. So I think the market has changed in that aspect, that instead of 20 or 30 companies trying to produce their own specification and sell that to the tire industry, we have the tire industry saying, this is what we need. Can you make it? Do you think that's made a difference to the market?
It has made a difference, although, when we look at the specifications given by tire producers, notably RCB Rubber, Michelin, Bridgestone, they haven't told the whole story, right? So in case of RCB Rubber, I think that work is really very, very unique, and to show that pull. I mean, just the fact that two arch rivals, number 1 and 2, collaborate on recovered carbon black, that's so incredibly motivating, and also that makes me tell the small startups, if big corporations and arch rivals like Michelin and Bridgestone can work together, you can work together with your peer. You don't have any competitors. That is my take on it. The startups, they don't have competitors. They have partners. They have collaborators for creating networks and ecosystems. I think in specifications for recovered carbon black, things really fall into place. There's like a puzzle which is almost solved by now. There's a few pieces missing, but recently the ASTM D36 work group has been quite active. There's a new in-rubber test which was now implemented and which was created by Conti, actually, the Fourier transformation rheology, where we measure the reinforcement in an unvulcanized rubber. And Conti developed this to discover recovered carbon black in a supposed furnace carbon black. So they did it. I think they did it for quality control, but now we can use that to measure up, to benchmark a recovered carbon black with a furnace carbon black that is used in the same application. For tires, that will be mainly a 660, which is the typical carcass grade in sidewall and inner liner. And we see there is pretty good recovered carbon blacks that are really on eye level in reinforcement with 660. And that is one part of the specification. The other, of course, we want low volatiles. We want the pyrolysis to finish, meaning toluene transmission values need to be very high, and they can be even better than furnace grade carbon black values. And certain, specifically in the pH values can be lower than furnace carbon black values. Then what we might want to control is ash content. In Europe, we have passenger car tires with high silica, precipitated silica content, and that brings an ash content in recovered carbon black of more than 20%. The tire makers wanted to reduce the ash content to below 20 because then they thought they can participate in the REACH registration for furnace carbon black, which is defined to 20% ash maximum. But now we have our own REACH registration for recovered carbon black by CircTech and Alpha Carbon, so that ash maximum ash content limit is no longer really needed. It will be needed again when we see a lot of recovered carbon black in the end of life tires, and then when we will recycle those tires again. Then, of course, in order to avoid accumulation of the recovered carbon black, we need to control the ash content. But we're far away from recovered carbon black to be already visible in the end of life tires. So right now, ash content might not be that much a limitation anymore. And that's pretty much what you want to control in a recovered carbon black. The one thing is about dispersion in rubber, which is mainly controlled by the degree of milling of the recovered carbon black. Because other than the furnace carbon black, recovered carbon black can be big lumps and a very large particle size distribution, so it needs to be milled. And I think there's consensus to mill less than 10 microns, and then we have a good dispersion. That test, the particle size test, is still being developed. It hasn't been balloted and approved by ASTM yet. But that's pretty much all the testing we really need for recovered carbon black. So I think this year we can put a tick on all the testing and specification for recovered carbon black, which comes just in time for those companies who industrialize in 24, 25, maybe more 25 than 24.
Okay, so just one question on the sustainable carbon black, because we're seeing a couple of companies have shown that they can take tire pyrolysis oil and use that as their feedstock for producing carbon black, and they create sustainable carbon black, which they say is compatible or equivalent to virgin carbon blacks. Now, to me, as an onlooker, that suggests that taking pyrolyzing the tire pyrolysis, creating the sustainable carbon black from tire pyrolysis oil would appear to be a simpler route to getting a sustainable material than going through the conventional, shall we say, recovered carbon black process. Would that be a valid assessment? And also, if that is an easier route to take, will the sustainable carbon black from tire pyrolysis oil demotivate people from working with recovered carbon black?
I think the second question is the answer to the first question, because you see, pyrolysis oil and recovered carbon black are Siamese twins. There is no one without the other. So I appreciate major furnace carbon black producers saying that, yeah, recovered carbon black is nice, but it cannot really fill all the applications of carbon black. It cannot replace a hard black, so 300 type group, 200 type group, and 100 type group, which is really where the carbon black industry, this is the degree of specialty, and this is the value. We're talking about the tread grades. So recovered carbon black cannot be used in the tread. And then, of course, you can put up, you can replace furnace carbon black with a circular furnace carbon black from pyrolysis oil. What you have to know is the pyrolysis oil cannot be used one-to-one. Only the bottoms distillation can be used, maybe 25%. And then you're talking, you need to sell 4 tons of recovered carbon black for 1 ton of such circular, highly reinforcing furnace carbon black. So I think it's all connected. However, when you look at the volumes, that will limit the available volume of the circular furnace carbon black, because there comes a point where you cannot sell so much recovered carbon black into semi-reinforcing applications in order to get the high number, the high volume of circular furnace grade. But of course, there's also renewable furnace carbon black from bio oils, for example, tall pitch, so pine oil, but pine oil, tall, and pyrolysis oil have the same problem. In the furnace process, they don't have the same production yield for carbon black. The carbon content is not as high as with the current fossil heavy feedstocks. So you're in a way limited. You can produce a sustainable product, but you might be limited in volume. You might also be limited in the cost of the product. And that will kind of limit the market volume. However, I think it's a good alternative. It's a good sustainable alternative to fossil-based furnace carbon blacks. And then if we zoom out all of this, carbon black has already been replaced with silica. Silica is competing with carbon black. We have several sustainable carbon blacks, including also methane pyrolysis carbon black, which is also only soft black, so semi-reinforcing, not the highly reinforcing. We got all those sustainable alternative fillers competing in a very similar space. What is unique to the circular and renewable furnace carbon blacks is you can make soft grades and hard grades. You have the flexibility to cover the whole ASTM and even non-ASTM range of carbon blacks. You have that flexibility. And I think all these products, they have their position for the tire maker on their journey to sustainability. They will be mixed in the tires. There will be not everything replaced by recovered carbon black or circular furnace carbon black. So, I think nobody can really predict how it develops, which product will be a favorite and which product will be limited. You know, there are some constraints, as I told you, for the circular furnace carbon black, also for the renewable furnace carbon black. There's very limited supply volume at the moment available for methane pyrolysis carbon black, which is really, let's say, a byproduct of hydrogen production, because that is what drives that kind of business. Only that the byproduct is 75% of the production. You only get 25% hydrogen and 75% carbon black. And there's only one company in the world producing, and the capacity right now is it's below 20,000 tons. In 25, it will be 200,000 tons. For carbon black, that is still a small volume. Whereas for recovered carbon black, we're talking some 300, 400,000 tons world capacity by 25. We're talking some 800 to 1 million by 2030. So that is a sizable volume.
Okay, so it's an interesting discussion, and I'm sure we could quite easily talk about this for hours on end. And whilst we might find it interesting, I'm not sure that everybody would. Moving on from the actual topic, you're a prime mover in the Smithers Recovered Carbon Black Conference. Can you tell us a bit more about the forthcoming conference and why people should attend it?
Okay, yes, it's true. I'm over the years business partner of the Smithers Recovered Carbon Black Conference, which really came out of a workshop I did on the Carbon Black World in 2018 in Düsseldorf, which surprisingly had a lot of interest, and we didn't have enough space in the room for that workshop, so that we said, let's create a conference. And then came, of course, COVID. We had an online conference, and last year the Recovered Carbon Black Conference actually was for the first time bigger than the Furnace Carbon Black Conference, the Carbon Black World, which is also happening this year in China in the month of April. And now we really have those two industries overlap. In the Recovered Carbon Black Conference last year in Berlin, 40% of the attendants were large corporations, Carbon Black and Tyre. 30% of the speakers were large corporations, Carbon Black and Tyre. So coming back to answering your question, this year, again, I don't see it will be any smaller than last year. We're still working on confirming the dates and location. It will be in the second half of the year. Of course, we're aiming big. Likely it will be in a southern place. And that's really at the moment all I can say. We haven't defined the agenda, but large parts of the agenda will actually give the stage again to the big corporations, carbon black companies, chemical companies like BASF, tire companies, because they are really driving the industry, either through the interest in recovered carbon black or through the interest in tire pyrolysis oil as a sustainable feedstock.
The makeup of the conference is I think valuable and interesting to the industry, because for many years at another conference, recyclers complained bitterly that they had no engagement with the tire manufacturers. That is changing, but it has been a criticism laid at the recyclers and their conferences that they're talking amongst themselves, but not engaging with the industry, the tire industry. I see from the makeup of the Recovered Carbon Black conferences that you've bridged that gap. You have the tire manufacturers, you have the rubber industry, you've got carbon black people, and they're now talking to recyclers. And with that dialogue, you can build relationships and build a future for the industry. So I congratulate you on developing that very successful conference. What would you say the key reason that people should come to that conference would be?
I think the key really is, and it's not my work. It's a collaboration with Smithers. They really are the experts in arranging and running conferences. They run, they run a number of conferences every week, so they know the location, they know everything, all the logistics about it. But the key really is that since 2018, we have created a community. We have created we have created a group of people who come surely for the next event. The core group will come again. And that is the important thing. So we will see again, in one way or another, Michelin and Bridgestone, we'll see BASF, we'll see Continental, we'll see the carbon black makers. And I think that really is the value of the conference, that we have reached a critical size with the community, and also a trust of the community that, the next event will be as good as the previous one. I think it's an established conference now. With the last conference, as I said, it has outgrown Carbon Black World. And 260 participants is a fantastic number for a conference. Also, I think it's a good it's a good compromise between ticket price, location, because there's other conferences in the same space that maybe have a higher ticket price and less participants. But I think with Smithers and the Recovered Carbon Black Conference, we found the sweet spot, which is working, and that has been shown with the last very successful conference.
Okay. Right, now, I think the final question, and this calls for a bit of speculation.
I'm an expert in speculation.
we don't know what's happening with the ECHA investigation into PAH or microplastics. We don't know what the outcome is, but I think we can guess that long term, there's going to be an increase in the volume of material that we're going to have to dispose of one way or another. If the European Commission does restrict crumb rubber and puts all that material back in the market, is that something that is going to be helpful to the pyrolysis sector?
I think it is, although it might not be at that particular crumb size, which might be, cost prohibitive for the pyrolysis industry. Any feedstock. I was amazed, some Indian pyrolysis projects, they told me what they estimate they are paying for importing European tires. They pay hundreds of euros per ton for those imported tires. And that, of course, puts you with a penalty. Then how much, operation cost can you afford on top of that? How much investment CapEx can you afford on top of that? And it's a little bit like that. We have that powder crumb capacity, which is pretty big. And, it's almost like this is the established recycling routes for tires. If you go material recycling, you're talking about crumb right now, because then the thermal recovery is cement. And both industries are, let's say, consolidated, almost, mafia-alike. So the question is, how can the existing crumb capacity, what can they do with the machines they already have, right? And the answer is not easy. Also, and then there's changes happening on both ends. On the one end, there's changing maybe with ECHA and the crumb. On the other end, the cement industry is changing from rotary kilns to what they call calciners, which get a powder feed. And so they will not be able to use whole tires in that calciner. And also, I think, powder feed, it's cost prohibitive. You wouldn't granulate to a fine powder and then burn the fine powder. I mean, that would be very cost prohibitive and would not make sense for sustainability either. So I guess I don't have the crystal ball for this, but what I see is the companies doing granulates and powders, they are now collaborating with the pyrolysis industry. And of course, the crumb size is different, and maybe they don't fill anymore the machines for the finer crumb sizes. But for the pyrolysis, a smaller crumb is one of the big trends, because the smaller the crumb, the higher the surface. If you heat from the outside of the crumb, you need a high surface. So we're talking, 2 to 8 millimeter crumb size as a feed for the pyrolysis, and that is something the crumb industry can deliver. Of course, they want some money for it. Now the electric power prices are very high, and typical good strategy for a pyrolysis company is to put that operational cost into the capital expenditure cost by buying that granulator, buying that shredder themselves, because it's fairly easy to get capex. But if your OPEX is too high, the whole business plan is not working anymore, because your product prices need to be too high. And then you're constrained into a niche of the market, maybe the upper end of the market, which, for example, we've seen with black bear carbon. This is the best recovered carbon black. However, the question would be, do the tire makers pay for that best recovered carbon black? Or do the paint makers and the ink makers pay for the best recovered carbon black? So I think it will kind of fall into place. Exactly about the number, I think it will be difficult to predict.
Yeah, we're in a state of change. The market has become very dynamic, and it's positive for some players and not so positive for others. Time will tell. Okay. Thank you very much for your time, Martin. It's been an interesting discussion. Lots of points covered, and I hope we can talk to you again sometime.
Thank you, Ewan. It has been a pleasure. Looking forward to the next time. Thank you.
Well, that was a really interesting discussion with Martin. Thank you very much. Ewan, what do you think about this discussion?
It was good to talk to Martin, because the market has changed dynamically, and we've seen companies who have moved from research and pilot plants to commercial plants, and that has made a big difference to the market. And also, the drive from tire manufacturers towards sustainability has created a demand that wasn't there before. Previously, the pyrolysis projects were going to the industry and saying, this is what we produce, is it any use to you? And mostly the tire companies were a bit ambivalent about it. But 2 years ago, Michelin and Bridgestone turned around and said, this is what we want, and told the pyrolysis sector what sort of specification, what sort of quantities they would need, and that has changed the market. We have seen companies like Pyrum, Enviro, Boulder, and a few others start to sell plants and start to sell produce, and the market has changed from one where there were lots of research and development projects to one where it has now become commercial, and that has been a big change. Martin also discussed briefly the Recovered Carbon Black Conference, which has been an amazing success, and one that we will hopefully be attending again this year when it's announced. So that's it for this episode.